Okay, so this video, which I'll shoot in two parts, is about what to look for when buying a TRS-80. Now, these computers haven't been sold since the late 1980s. They're very hard to find, and often when you find them, people who have them want a lot of money for them. So what I'm going to try to show you is what to look for if you're seeing one at, say, on the internet, like eBay or Gumtree, or if you're in the United States, Craigslist. You may not have a chance to power them up, and you want to know if what you're getting is value for money. So I've got two Model 4s here to show you. Now, it goes without saying that if a computer has lived its whole life under a dust cover, chances are the people that owned it were very particular about looking after their computer, and you can usually find that the computer will be in much better condition. These two machines I'm going to show you here represent opposite ends of the spectrum. This Model 4D from America here, to use an automotive expression, is probably what we would call a low mileage computer. It's only done maybe 50,000 miles, whereas this one on the right is my own personal Model 4, which I bought when they were new, and it's been used non-stop ever since. If you have a look, you can see that it's quite grubby, as happens with these computers. In fact, my one's done so much work that it's had disk drives replaced, and the keyboard wore out and that's replaced, and it's done a lot of work. So, alright, I'll show you what to look for if you're looking at a computer, say at a garage sale or something like that, and you can't power it up, but you're wondering whether it's a good buy or not. Particularly with Model 4s, they have a painted textured finish. If it's clean, chances are the computer hasn't done much work. If it's dirty like this one, then it's probably done a whole lot of work. With the Model 3, which has a silver painted finish, what I tend to look for is if there's a lot of scratches and a lot of wear along this front bit here, then it's probably done a lot of work. Whereas if there's hardly any scratches on a Model 3 and the paint hasn't worn off along the front, then it's probably a good candidate for a low use machine. Now, the other thing to look for with TRS-80 keyboards, which I'll show later in another video, or in the rest of this video when I record it in a moment, is you got to look for a bow in the keyboard. You won't see it on these ones. The bow comes from pressure being pressed on here while the computer's been in storage, and it leans on a post and then busts the bottom of the keyboard. But I'll show you that later. The other thing to look for on TRS-80s is screen burn. Now, on one of these, it looks like a bunch of lines, grey lines on the screen when the screen isn't running. In the worst case, you can actually read the text burnt into the screen. Now, that's not necessarily a problem. You can go to my website and buy replacement brand new CRTs for these computers, so that's not really a deal breaker. But if it's got lots of screen burn, you can usually use that as a bargaining point. Now, how do you spot a TRS-80 that's original, that hasn't had any work done to it? Okay, so under here on these computers, they come with a cover that covers the expansion port. Really, the only time that would come off is if the computer was used with a hard disk. Other things to look for: a low mileage computer, these video controls, they should move easily and smoothly. Often they'll be oxidized and you can't move them. If they're oxidized, then other things inside the computer will be oxidized. Other things to look for are on these feet here. If those bolts, and these ones here as well, have rust on them, then the computer's sat in water or a humid environment, and if that's the case, then it will be very oxidized inside and probably won't work very well. So the other thing to look for is that all the 10 bolts, or screws I should say, are in place. But another easy way to check is if you can find one that has the original warranty seal that hasn't been tampered with, because there's one screw under here, which is, well, as I say, the good news is if you find one of these, it's never been opened. The bad news is, in one of these, it's never been opened, and that means it's probably got the original power supply filter capacitors, which are prone to blowing up. So I'll show you those in a moment when I take the lid off this other machine. The other thing to look for on TRS-80s, they all have a screw in the back here to help steady the motherboard for when they're being shipped, and you'll quite often find them missing in the back there. Okay. The other things to look for is smooth disk drive door application. They should park all the way up and close just like that. If they're loose or otherwise busted, they're probably no good. You'll never get the disc to settle properly, and it will be unreliable. On these Model 4Ds, these latches don't move unless there's a disc in there, and then if you put a disc in there, they'll close properly. So if these have been pushed and busted, then you can pretty much guarantee that the disk drives will have had a hard life, as will have the rest of the computer. Another thing, getting back to the keyboard to look at, sometimes the key caps, particularly these ones here, and the valves can all be worn shiny. That's an indication of a high use computer. Okay, so what I'm going to do is stop this video now and flip the lid off this Model 4 here and give you a quick tour inside of what to look for when you buy one of these before powering it up the first time. Okay, I've taken the lid off my Model 4, the original one that's done a very high mileage, but before I show you that one, I'll show you what I'm talking about with these keyboards. So this looks like a pretty normal Model 4 keyboard. It's got a couple of keys busted off, but they're easy enough to fix. But when you turn it over, you see this great big hole in the bottom there. I've put some wires in to attempt to repair that, and this keyboard will work again. But what that, it's sort of, let's zoom out. You may be able to see a slight bow in the keyboard there. What that is on this machine here, see that post in the center? That post there has had too much force on the keyboard and has busted the hole into that. If the keyboard has a hole in that, like I say, it's generally repairable, but it's a good sign the computer's had a pretty rough life. Now, if when you're looking to buy one of these computers and the seller will let you have a look inside, I suppose it's not unlike looking inside a used car. The more associated dust and crud inside it probably means it's had a harder life. This is my computer. It's been through several house moves with me. It's got dust in it, and the rubber band that's here has worn away, and there's bits of it there floating around. Now, the power supplies on these do give some problems. So before I power up any machine, I automatically replace these filter capacitors. This one here and these two here. The old ones just randomly can decide to give up the ghost. They smoke, they stink, and surprisingly the computer will actually keep running, but it's best to replace them, and so I do that on all my machines. So if you buy one of these computers and then after half an hour of running time it starts to smoke, and that's those capacitors. They're cheap to change over, and you may as well do them before you start powering the machine up. So yeah, just generally look around the inside of the computer, make sure all its bolts and nuts and things are in place, that it hasn't been messed around with too much. Some people put a piece of cardboard over here because this is where the live power switch is, and you can electrocute yourself easily when working on these machines. And yeah, these okay, just to finish off, American TRS-80s will have a big metal cover here for the FCC radio frequency emission requirements. Australian ones will just have a hook here, which is what that bolt in the back connects to. A quick way to tell if you've got 128k of memory in a Model 4 is if both these rows of chips are populated, because only if you got the 128k kit from Tandy you got a 128k emblem on the keyboard. A lot of computers say 64k on the keyboard, and but they've really got 128k in them. If you find a circuit board sitting over in the bottom left hand corner of the computer, that's probably a high resolution graphics board like that one there. Radio Shack's official high resolution board is about half the size of this. It's only about that big. That one is a graphics solution one. And yeah, so really that is a quick tour of the inside of a TRS-80 and the outside, and what to look for if you're contemplating buying a used one and are wondering how much to offer for them, or whether the price being asked for them is for a untested machine is acceptable or not. Obviously, if you have the ability to plug the thing in and see it up and running, that's so much the better. But in a lot of cases, when you're talking about garage sales and flea markets and things like that, you don't have a chance to plug it in. You just got to have a look at it, power it up, and see what happens. Yeah, so just beware of that hole in the keyboard that happens on a lot of them, and you should be able to get a, if not a good machine, one that's a good starting point, that that if it only requires some parts to fix it, that'll be cheap and inexpensive. CRTs like these, if you see my other video, are easy to replace if they don't work or they have screen burn. Power supplies are easy to replace if they don't work properly. They're not very dear. Same with disk drives. They do wear out with age, but you can get belts for them and replace them with disk drives out of other 8-bit computers. Yeah, so that's what you're looking for buying a used TRS-80. Thanks for watching.